First, we found ancient stone forts melted by nuclear-level heat. Then, we found mammoths flash frozen in seconds. But today, we're looking at the third piece of the apocalypse puzzle, a global crime scene where the world is completely upside down. We have advanced ancient megacities drowning in the darkness of the ocean floor, while the skeletons of massive deep-sea leviathans are sitting high and dry in the scorching desert. Stick around for number one because it's a global error code that changes absolutely everything. Let's get to it. Number 13, Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of the Whales, Egypt. You're standing in the blistering, waterless hell of the Egyptian Sahara. The temperature is 115 degrees, but as you kick away the golden sand, you don't uncover a camel skeleton or a dinosaur bone. You uncover a 50-foot-long, perfectly preserved apex predator of the deep ocean. Welcome to Wadi al-Hitan, otherwise known as the Valley of the Whales. It is a terrifying, impossible graveyard that simply shouldn't exist. Here in the Valley of the Whales, the desert floor is littered with hundreds of massive prehistoric whale skeletons. Geology textbooks expect you to swallow the idea that an ancient sea simply evaporated, millimeter by agonizing millimeter over millions of years. But the hydrodynamics of this mass grave loudly mock that lazy theory. These colossal bones aren't scattered by slow, gentle tides. They are violently tangled together, perfectly articulated and crushed alongside deep-sea creatures like massive rays and sharks. You do not get pristine 50-foot skeletons from a gentle, slow, dry evaporation. The staggering sheer tonnage and the specific chaotic clustering of these massive fossils indicate that millions of tons of marine life were suddenly dumped and stranded by a single catastrophic megasonic wave. It was an apocalyptic flash freeze in dry sand, completely burying a massive, thriving ecosystem under millions of tons of sediment in a literal instant, long before any of it could naturally decay. Paleontologists desperately insist this was just a shallow bay that slowly dried up, trapping these unfortunate leviathans in the mud. But the staggering preservation of such immense mass requires a violent, oxygen-starved burial that entirely contradicts the boring, slow evaporation hypothesis. And if a megawave can drop deep ocean whales in the burning desert, just imagine the massive megalithic stone fortresses it swallowed off the coast of Japan. Number 12, Yonaguni Monument, Japan. In 1986, a local diver named Kiichiro Aratake was exploring the clear waters off the coast of a tiny Japanese island. He was just looking for a good spot to observe hammerhead sharks. Instead, as he descended into the blue, the ocean floor suddenly dropped away, revealing a sprawling, monolithic nightmare. He hadn't found a reef, he had found a ghost town carved from solid stone. The Yonaguni Monument sits 80 feet underwater, and it defies everything we know about ancient engineering. We're talking about colossal, perfectly parallel terraces, sharp 90-degree angles, and sheer drop-offs that look meticulously carved by intelligent hands. There are sprawling staircases seemingly made for giants and massive staging areas. Mainstream geologists look at this and stubbornly call it natural erosion, claiming tectonic stress fractures the sandstone into perfect geometric blocks. But marine archaeologists call that entirely impossible. For this monumental structure to have been carved above water, it had to be built before the sea levels rose during the end of the last ice age. That places its construction at around 10,000 BC, thousands of years before the first recognized human civilizations. The geological establishment insists that strong ocean currents can carve straight lines over millennia. But the breathtaking precision of the right angles feels too deliberate, too mathematical to be a fluke of nature. If you think a few straight lines off the coast of Japan are just the ocean playing tricks on our eyes, wait until you see an entire mythological empire sitting perfectly intact at the bottom of a gulf in India. Number 11, Dwarka, India. For thousands of years, ancient Hindu texts described a dazzling golden city belonging to Lord Krishna. It was a utopian paradise of unmatched wealth and architecture, ultimately swallowed up by the violent ocean after a massive apocalyptic war. For centuries, mainstream historians laughed it off. They patted believers on the head and called it a myth, a beautiful bedtime story for children. Until the year 2000. Oceanographers were running routine pollution surveys in the Gulf of Cambay when their sonar bounced off something massive 120 feet deep. It wasn't just a shipwreck, it was a sprawling 5-mile-long city resting silently in the darkness. As divers went down, they found perfectly laid out foundations, massive walls, and artifacts scattered across the sea floor. The ultimate shock came when they recovered pieces of carved wood from the site. Carbon dating hit the academic world like a sledgehammer. The wood dated back to 9000 BC. The laughing stopped immediately. The myth of Krishna's golden city wasn't a fairy tale, it was a forensic reality, preserved in the cold depths, proving that advanced civil engineering existed millennia before the Sumerians or Egyptians ever stacked a single brick. Skeptics frantically argue that the carbon dating might have been contaminated, or that it was just a primitive coastal settlement exaggerated over thousands of years of storytelling. But carbon dating doesn't lie. What if the myths we dismiss are just traumatic historical records wrapped in metaphor? Speaking of ancient myths turning out to be shockingly real, let's look at a legendary port city that the pharaohs quite literally lost in the mud. Number 10. Heraklion, Tunis, Egypt. Imagine being the absolute jewel of the ancient world. You are the gateway to Egypt, controlling all trade and wealth. You are beautiful, heavily fortified, and protected by the gods themselves. Then, in the blink of an eye, the earth groans, the sea violently rebels, and you simply vanish from the face of the earth. For centuries, classical historians wrote about you, but without a single ruin to prove it, modern science assumed you never existed. In 2000, marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio was mapping the Abu Qir Bay when he stumbled upon the impossible. The legendary city of Heraklion was discovered entirely intact underwater, sleeping quietly beneath the waves. The dive teams found 16-foot-tall granite statues of unnamed pharaohs, massive temple columns, and over 60 ancient shipwrecks perfectly preserved. This wasn't a city that was slowly abandoned as sea levels gradually rose. The geological evidence paints a much more terrifying picture. The ground essentially liquefied from a sudden, massive seismic event, turning the solid foundation into a temporary soup. A colossal tidal wave followed seconds later, swallowing the grand metropolis whole and dragging it into the abyss in a matter of hours. The logic of soil liquefaction perfectly explains the sudden disappearance, transforming solid rock into quicksand in seconds. But it makes you wonder, if a thriving, massive city can vanish without a trace before lunch, what else is hiding down there? Actually, to answer that terrifying question, we need to go much deeper, about 2,000 feet deeper, into a pitch-black zone that breaks the timeline of human evolution completely. Number 9. The Cuban Underwater City. In 2001, a marine exploration crew off the coast of Cuba was doing what everyone with a boat in the Caribbean does, hunting for sunken Spanish galleons filled with gold. They sent deep-sea sonar equipment down into the pitch black, scanning the barren ocean floor. But the screens didn't show the curved hulls of wooden ships. They showed something that, according to every history book ever written, fundamentally shouldn't be there. 2,000 feet beneath the surface, the sonar mapped massive symmetrical geometry. We are talking about colossal pyramids, perfectly intersecting roads, and sprawling circular structures covering 2 square kilometers of the ocean floor. The megalithic stones appear highly polished and perfectly fitted. But here's the problem that makes mainstream academics break out in a cold sweat. If for a city of this magnitude to currently sit 2,000 feet underwater, it must have sunk during a specific geological period. The math is brutal. For this landmass to be above water, it had to have existed 50,000 years ago. This completely shatters the accepted timeline of human evolution, placing advanced megalithic builders squarely in an era when we were supposedly just figuring out how to make fire. Mainstream academia largely ignores these scans, lazily claiming that deep-sea sonar anomalies often trick the eye into seeing geometric shapes where only natural rocks exist. But if those are actually pyramids, our entire understanding of human history is a lie. And if you think 50,000 years is a hard pill to swallow, let's look at a shallower location that proves highly advanced grid planning was a reality while our ancestors were supposedly living in caves. Number 8. Pavlo-Petri, Greece. You're swimming off the sun-drenched coast of southern Greece. The water is crystal clear, and you look down, expecting to see a vibrant coral reef or a school of silver fish. Instead, you realize you are floating dead center over a perfectly straight, wide avenue. To your left and right are the undeniable stone foundations of two-story houses, courtyards, and complex burial tombs. You are swimming through a neighborhood. Pavlo-Petri is officially recognized as the oldest submerged city in the Mediterranean Sea. It is an absolute marvel of ancient engineering that refuses to fit neatly into the timeline. This isn't just a haphazard pile of rocks left by primitive coastal dwellers. It boasts perfectly planned streets, complex water management systems, and a level of grid-planned urban living that is breathtaking. It proves that highly advanced, structured metropolitan life existed thousands of years earlier than our textbooks claim, only to be ruthlessly swallowed by the encroaching sea. The sheer scale and organization of Pavlo-Petri indicates a society with deep understandings of mathematics, architecture, and civic engineering. The foundations are so remarkably preserved that researchers can literally map out the daily lives, trade routes, and social hierarchies of a civilization that vanished over 3 millennia ago. Archaeologists calmly state that it sank due to a series of localized, cascading earthquakes over centuries, but the sheer perfection of its layout forces us to ask, where did they get the blueprint for such a society so early? But before we can answer that, we have to address the elephant in the room. A massive disaster so massive it drowned an entire continent and forces you to pick a side in the ultimate historical debate. Number 7. Doggerland, the European Atlantis. Picture a sprawling, vibrant paradise where you could casually walk from London to Amsterdam without getting your feet wet. A massive expanse of lush plains, winding rivers, and thriving hunter-gatherer communities stretching as far as the eye could see. It was the heart of prehistoric Europe. Then, on an otherwise normal day, the horizon violently turned white. A deafening roar shattered the world, and everything they knew was gone in minutes. This massive landmass was known as Doggerland, and it was wiped off the map by a catastrophic event called the Storegga Slide. An unfathomable chunk of the Norwegian continental shelf suddenly collapsed underwater. This triggered a mega tsunami that hit the European coastline with waves over 60 feet high, traveling at highway speeds. It drowned thousands of miles of fertile land and its inhabitants instantly, trapping the remains beneath what is now the North Sea. When modern fishermen trawl the area, they don't just pull up cod, they pull up ancient human skulls, beautifully carved bone spears, and the massive teeth of long-dead mammoths. It is a mass grave of an entire prehistoric ecosystem. The suddenness of the event erased a crucial bridge in human migration, fundamentally altering the shape of the world overnight. Mainstream science says the Great Flood is just a biblical metaphor born from localized river flooding. Alternative geologists say the Storegga Slide and the Younger Dryas impacts prove the flood was a literal global geological reality. Which tribe are you in, myth or history? Tell me below in the comments, because depending on your answer, the impossible highway sitting at the bottom of the Caribbean is either a natural fluke or the literal road to Atlantis. Number 6. The Bimini Road, Bahamas. In the late 1930s, an incredibly famous sleeping prophet made a bizarre, seemingly impossible prediction. He claimed that the first ruins of the lost, technologically advanced continent of Atlantis would be discovered off the coast of a specific Bahamian island in the late 1960s. The scientific community scoffed. It was psychic mumbo-jumbo. Until September 1968 rolled around and a diver looked down at the ocean floor. Lying under the crystal-clear waters of the Caribbean is the Bimini Road. It consists of half a mile of massive, perfectly rectangular limestone blocks laid out exactly like a paved highway. The stones are huge, some up to 13 feet long, and they feature overlapping joints and right angles that scream intelligent design. It was discovered exactly in the location and in the exact decade that the psychic Edgar Cayce predicted. Divers have since found secondary rows of stones parallel to the main thoroughfare, making it look like a submerged dock for massive ancient ships. The blocks are so symmetrically cut and placed that swimming over them feels like flying over an abandoned, flooded airstrip of a forgotten empire. If this was a port facility, it implies global trade routes existing during the Ice Age. Geologists confidently declare the stones are a natural phenomenon called beach rock fracturing, where stress causes rock to break into surprisingly neat squares. But beach rock doesn't usually stack itself into load-bearing, overlapping joints. The mystery lingers, but it's child's play compared to what Robert Ballard found when he turned his attention from the Titanic to a body of water that swallowed an entire sea in a single afternoon. Number 5. The Black Sea Deluge. Imagine living on the shores of a peaceful freshwater lake surrounded by thriving early agricultural communities. The climate is perfect, crops are yielding, and life is undeniably good. Then the ground begins to vibrate. You hear an ungodly rumble from the west. The vast ocean is literally breaking through the mountains, and it's coming for you and your family with an unstoppable, terrifying fury. Marine geologist Robert Ballard, the legendary explorer who found the wreck of the Titanic, turned his high-tech submersibles to the Black Sea. What he found was chilling. He discovered ancient, perfectly preserved shorelines and undeniable evidence of human habitation sitting 300 feet below the current water level. Geological core samples show exactly what happened. The Mediterranean Sea violently burst through the Bosporus Strait, pouring into the basin with the force of 200 Niagara Falls. It instantly drowned an entire civilization, raising the water levels by hundreds of feet in a matter of months. Because the deeper waters of the Black Sea are anoxic, meaning they contain zero oxygen, the wooden structures, tools, and remnants of this lost world are preserved with terrifying clarity. Skeptics argue this was a slow trickle over decades, allowing people to calmly pack up and move, rather than a violent deluge. But the pristine, undisturbed preservation of human structures beneath the anaerobic layer says otherwise. It's a chilling reminder that the ocean always wins. And if you think the ocean is strictly confined to the coastlines, wait until we climb 12,000 feet up a mountain to find the impossible. Number 4. Lake Titicaca ruins in Bolivia. You are standing at the top of the world, 2.5 miles above sea level, in the thin, freezing air of the jagged Andes Mountains. You dive into a vast, crystal-clear lake, expecting nothing but glacial runoff and some local fish. Instead, as the light fades, you find massive, monolithic stone temples rising from the mud, and impossibly, oceanic fossils scattered across the stones. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world, sitting 12,500 feet up in the mountains of Bolivia. Yet deep underwater, scuba divers found incredible, massive temple ruins belonging to the ancient Tiwanaku civilization. These aren't just crude huts, they are monumental stone structures requiring advanced engineering. But even weirder than an underwater city at the top of a mountain is the lake's biology. The lake contains oceanic seahorses, marine fossils, and saltwater species that have no business existing thousands of miles from the coast and miles above sea level. It is a biological and archaeological paradox that physically defies the laws of nature and standard geological timelines. Finding sea life in a high-altitude freshwater basin suggests an event of unimaginable violence that completely displaced the ocean's waters. Did the Andes Mountains slowly and peacefully rise from the ocean floor over millions of years, safely carrying an ancient city and living sea life with it? Or did a 12,000-foot megatsunami push ocean water and sea creatures all the way up the mountain during a global cataclysm? Geologists say tectonic shift. Catastrophists say tidal wave. What do you think? Let me know, because our next stop shows exactly what happens when humans intentionally drown an empire. Number 3. Lion City, Qiandao Lake, China. In 1959, a government made a ruthless mathematical calculation. They needed hydroelectric power to modernize a region, but standing directly in their way was a magnificent 1,300-year-old architectural masterpiece, a sprawling metropolis of intricate stonework, imperial temples, and bustling streets that held the history of millions. The solution? Evacuate the people, flood the valley, and build the dam anyway. This is the Lion City, resting silently 130 feet beneath the surface of Qiandao Lake in China. It is an incredibly well-preserved ancient city with intricate stonework covering an area the size of 62 football fields. Divers gliding through its streets find perfectly carved dragons, grand archways, and intact wooden structures that haven't seen the sun in over half a century. We acknowledge that this specific city didn't sink from an ancient cataclysm. It was intentionally flooded by a dam, but it serves as a terrifyingly perfect visual benchmark. It shows us exactly how perfectly water preserves and completely hides a massive stone empire. If we didn't have the paperwork proving we flooded it, it would just be another lost mystery. We know exactly how and why this city sank. It was human engineering, plain and simple. But it serves as a terrifyingly preserved mirror for the rest of our list. If a government can drown a city in months and wipe it from sight, imagine what nature might do in a day. And nature might not be the only thing leaving artifacts in the deep, as our next discovery violently suggests. Number 2. The Baltic Sea Anomaly. A Swedish salvage team is slowly scanning the freezing, pitch-black floor of the Baltic Sea, hunting for the lucrative remains of old shipwrecks. The sonar pings, returning a shape that makes the captain choke on his coffee and rub his eyes. It isn't a ship. It's perfectly circular, massive, and it looks exactly like the Millennium Falcon crashed into the ocean floor. Deep-sea sonar captured the haunting images of a 200-foot-wide circular object resting at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. It features bizarre staircase-like structures leading up to a dome, and strange drag marks stretching for hundreds of meters behind it, as if it skidded to a halt upon impact. But the shape isn't the scariest part. Professional divers report that their high-tech electronics, cameras, and satellite phones completely fail when they get within 200 meters of the object. The moment they swim away, everything reboots and works perfectly. The object seems to emit a localized electromagnetic dampening field. Is it a sunken, crashed UFO, an experimental World War II anti-submarine device, or a highly advanced ancient underwater temple? Chemical analysis of fragments recovered from the site show levels of titanium and iron that do not occur naturally in that ocean basin. Experts desperately claim it's merely a glacial deposit, a bizarrely shaped rock dropped by melting ice sheets thousands of years ago. But rocks don't emit localized electromagnetic fields that fry modern technology. Whether it's extraterrestrial or ancient terrestrial, it pales in comparison to our final destination, a location that proves the greatest myth in human history isn't a myth at all. Number 1. The Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Recat structure. Over 2,000 years ago, the great philosopher Plato wrote in striking detail about an advanced utopian civilization arranged in massive concentric rings of water and land. It was the crown jewel of the world, destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune. We spent centuries looking for it under the crashing waves of the ocean. The tragedy is, we were looking in the wrong place entirely. This is the Eye of the Sahara, also known as the Recat structure. It is not currently underwater, but the evidence proves it absolutely was. The massive concentric rings spanning 25 miles in Mauritania perfectly match the exact mathematical dimensions and visual descriptions of Atlantis given by Plato. He described mountains to the north and a gentle sloping plain to the south, which matches the Recat identically. But the smoking gun lies in the dirt. The geological scarring around the structure shows massive, violent oceanic salt deposits, and the sheer impossible mathematical alignment with Plato's texts are impossible to ignore. The greatest underwater city on Earth isn't underwater anymore. It's hiding in plain sight in the driest desert on the planet, waiting to rewrite history. Number 0. The roof of the world. If you think finding an ocean city in the driest desert on Earth is the ultimate glitch in the Matrix, I have one final anomaly for you. And for this one, we have to climb into the death zone. Imagine you are an elite mountaineer. You've just spent weeks surviving avalanches, frostbite, and the suffocating lack of oxygen to reach the absolute roof of the world. You drag your exhausted body to the peak of Mount Everest, 29,000 feet above sea level. You look down at the rock you are standing on to plant your flag. But instead of frozen granite, you see the perfectly preserved shell of an ancient ocean creature staring back at you. It sounds like an altitude-induced hallucination, but it's a terrifying geological fact. The top 3,000 feet of Mount Everest, the famous yellow band that climbers must conquer to reach the summit, is made entirely of marine limestone. This rock is packed to the brim with the fossilized remains of crinoids, trilobites, and deep-sea shells. They lived, died, and were buried at the bottom of a prehistoric ocean. Yet somehow, the floor of an ancient sea is now the absolute highest point of dry land on planet Earth. To geologists, this is the ultimate triumph of the tectonic engine. The Indian subcontinent violently slammed into the Eurasian plate, crumbling the Earth's crust and shoving the ancient Tethys ocean floor 5.5 miles into the stratosphere. But the presence of ocean life resting literally above the clouds forces us to look at the sheer, unimaginable violence our planet is capable of. It means the very ground beneath your feet is not permanent. Mainstream science assures us this tectonic car crash took millions of years, moving at the slow, boring speed your fingernails grow. But catastrophists look at those perfectly preserved seashells and ask a terrifying question. What if the crust didn't buckle slowly? What if the Earth's skin shifted in a sudden violent upheaval, draining oceans and raising mountains in days instead of eons? If the roof of the world used to be the bottom of the sea, where is actually safe? See you in the comments. Stay curious.